So at this point, I was going to do an interactive session, which clearly is not going to work quite so straightforwardly via Zoom, but we'll press on anyway. And this is all about, I've written here, Epiphany is all about things that we don't expect. Somewhat relevant. So I was going to think about things in places where you don't expect them to be. And I was going to ask some questions, or I did have a conversation with two of my girls this morning over breakfast about what they thought the answers to these questions might be. So they might pop up in here. So I had three different things. People in places where you don't expect them to be. Have you ever had that where you're sort of, walking down the street and you come across someone from a different context and you see them somewhere else and you have a moment where you think, I know you, but I don't know how. It was always that thing as a child when you found teachers outside of school and you didn't really think that they should be, because teachers live in school as far as children are concerned. They don't have outside lives. We were walking back from church the other day, and we came out the end of the alleyway opposite our house and came across the school receptionist walking her dog. And the girls were like, what's she doing here? And I'm like, well, she's a person with a life and clearly has a dog that she's taking for a walk. So it was a bit sort of like, this is something that I know and something that I expect, but not where I expect to see it. Things like finding a king, not in a palace, but in a manger. Finding wise men in a stable. Not the sort of things that you would expect. Talking of which, unexpected visitors. I'm not entirely sure that Mary and Joseph expected shepherds and wise men to turn up just after they'd had a baby. I was going to ask who you might expect to visit when you've just had a new baby. I mentioned this to the girls this morning and they said, oh, doctors, midwives, that kind of thing, maybe siblings, might come to visit a new baby. When we had Martha, coming up to 10 years ago at home, the day after she was born, we had a visit from Richard Lounsborough, who was your unexpected visitor, you might think. And actually, he just said he'd popped in to say hello because they used to live in our house. So I thought he'd come and say hello. And actually, he said he was thinking of coming the day before, which would have been quite inconvenient because that was the day that Martha was born at home. So that would have been an unexpected visitor at the birth of a baby, possibly a little awkward. And the other thing about this story is unexpected gifts. I don't think that actually, if you've just had a baby, you would expect gold, frankincense, and myrrh, given the symbolism that comes with those gifts. So we had a conversation earlier about, what gifts might you bring to a new baby? You might bring baby toys, maybe a teddy bear, cuddly toy, a blanket, something that somebody significant to them had knitted. One of our friends has knitted each of our girls a blanket in rainbow colours that she gave to them when they were born, and that's a really special gift. But it's not the sort of thing that when you've just had a baby, you would expect somebody to bring something which signifies royalty, which signifies God. Something slightly unnerving about somebody bringing myrrh to a new baby, which is used in anointing the dead. But the whole point of this is that actually God turns up in places and in times that we don't expect, in lots of ways that we might not be looking for, and maybe sometimes forces us to think about things in different ways, which we've had to do this morning quite rapidly. So the important thing actually today, and as we go into the new year, is that we learn from that, and we learn from the story of the wise men that we're going to hear in a little while, so that we keep an eye out for the unexpected and that we are prepared to be surprised. Expect the unexpected, as they say, if that's possible.
The reading is from Isaiah chapter 60, verses 1 to 6. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. Your sons come from afar, and your daughters are carried on the hip. Then you will look and be radiant, Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you. To you, the riches of the nations will come. Herds of camels will cover your land. Young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense, and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
The second reading is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, and it's entitled Visitors from the East. Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea, during the time when Herod was king. Soon afterwards, some men who studied the stars came from the east to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the baby born to be king, King of the Jews? We saw his star when it came up in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard about this, he was very upset, and so was everyone else in Jerusalem. He called together all the chief priests and the teachers of the law and asked them, "Where will the Messiah be born?" "In the town of Bethlehem in Judea," they answered, "for this is what the prophet wrote. Bethlehem in the land of Judah, you are by no means the least in the leading cities of Judah, for from you will come a leader who will guide my people Israel." So Herod called the visitors from the east to a secret meeting and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem with these instructions: "Go and make a careful search for the child, and when you find him, let me know, so that I too may go and worship him." And so they left, and on their way they saw the same star they had seen in the east. When they saw it, how happy they were! What joy was theirs! It went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. They went into the house, and they saw the child with his mother Mary. They knelt down and worshipped him. They brought out their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and presented them to him. Then they returned to their country by another road, since God had warned them in a dream not to go back to Herod. Thanks be to God.
So, the story of the Magi, the arrival of these wise men from the east. It's a strange one. And like most of the Christmas story, it's become so familiar that it's really hard to see new things in it, and we stop noticing the surprises and the mysteries involved. The good news is that Jesus is born. God has come into the world and lives with us. Emmanuel. This we know. And I'm not going to try and find another way to say it or put a new slant on it from the perspective of the Epiphany. But there's a lot in the story of the wise men, of the wisdom and the light that we hear about in today's readings. So this is more of a pondering, a consideration of what we can see if we look beneath the surface a little at this story. There might be a conclusion, or it might just be a series of thoughts that you can use to draw your own. But I think sometimes it's valuable just to have time to think and see what comes out of it, especially now as we stand on the verge of a new year. So the story of the wise men, it's a well-known part of the Nativity story, and we're back to that school play again, with, I can see 3 children striding across a stage, firmly clutching brightly wrapped boxes. We know there were 3 kings. We know they came riding on their camels across the desert to visit the baby in the manger. Or do we? Actually, if we look at the story, we don't really know very much at all. And interestingly, Matthew is the only gospel writer who includes the Magi at all. And a lot of what we think we know isn't even in the story. Matthew calls them Magi, which means wise men. And he says that they'd seen the star and they travelled from the east to worship the King of the Jews, and that they brought with them gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So it turns out they're not kings at all. They don't ride camels. We've added those bits in ourselves. We don't even know how many there were. We assume there were 3 because of the number of presents. They brought 1 each, right? But Matthew doesn't say. He just says, Magi, or wise men from the east. And we don't know where they came from, apart from the east. And we don't even know when they arrived. Matthew says it was after Jesus was born. But given when Herod sent out his decree to kill all the young boys, he said everybody under the age of 2, based on the estimate that the wise men gave him of when the star had appeared. So it could have been any time in that period. So they were a group of magi, learned people who knew the prophecies well and understood what the prophecies meant. They'd been examining the stars for some kind of indication that these prophecies would be fulfilled, and they decided to set out to find out more. There's so much about the story that's unknown and so much to think about. It's a story of a journey, obviously, and in that journey some things become clear. They find Jesus, but others remain uncertain. And I think it's a story of contrasts between the insiders and the outsiders, between the unexpected and the planned for, and between the known and the unknown. And so I want to think about those 3 different sets of contrasts in the story as a way of exploring it a little bit more. So the first contrast is between the insiders and the outsiders. The Christmas story is, at its heart, a story of those on the outside being brought in and included into the main events. The reason Mary and Joseph were in Bethlehem in the first place was for the census. And Joseph had returned to the place he was born. And yet, in that place that he was born, there were no relatives he could stay with, no family or friends to give them a room when they were expecting a baby any minute. Is that odd, that in the city of Joseph's birth, Jesus had to be born in a stable rather than the safety of a family home? Or is that because there was space, but they weren't welcome, because Mary was pregnant and they weren't married? Interesting, isn't it? And the first people to hear the news of Jesus' birth, the first ones invited to visit, were the shepherds, those who lived outside the city walls. Not the religious leaders or those in power or authority, but the poor and unclean, outsiders who had nothing to offer and no gifts to bring. And the Magi, these people who travelled many miles because they believed they'd seen the birth of a king foretold in the stars. They came to worship him. They were foreign Gentiles, strangers from lands far away. It's likely they were astrologers of some kind. They studied the sky and believed that the stars contained prophecies. They came from the east, probably somewhere close to what is now modern-day Iraq, Iran, or Saudi Arabia, somewhere in that direction. And so they were outsiders too. And probably those reading this in Matthew's Gospel would have kind of seen them as that. They would have been odd, possibly suspicious people that they didn't know anything about. We contrast that with Herod and his chief priests and scribes, or the people that he calls together in his palace to find out about this prophecy. They're the people who are already on the inside. They're accepted. They're acceptable in society. They are the people who would have been expected to be notified of anything that happened that was significant. And they certainly wouldn't expect that a new king would be found anywhere other than within the palace. The Christmas story and the visit of the Magi shows us again that God is found not at the centre of power, but at the margins, not conforming to religious and cultural expectations, but beyond the boundaries where we and they might not think to look at first. So the second point is that contrast between the things that are planned and prepared for and the unexpected, the surprising. The arrival of the wise men caught Herod off guard. These unknown visitors arrived at his palace with news of this new king, who was essentially a threat to his authority. He's not sure what the implications of that might be, and he's unsettled, to put it mildly, by the challenge that this new king might bring. For Mary and Joseph, their first baby, born in somewhat difficult circumstances. One minute they're trying to get their heads round how on earth this happened and who is this baby that they've had. And the next, they're welcoming in shepherds who say they've been sent by angels. It's all a bit of a whirlwind, and they're still reeling from all of that shock. And now these wise men from the east turn up with some strange gifts. Were they shocked and unsettled by these latest visitors? Or were they almost resigned by now that so many surprising and strange things were happening, we might as well have another one? And how did Mary feel when these strangers came in, worshipping her baby boy, and then presenting him with myrrh, of all things, the oil that they used to anoint the dead? But as much as these events were surprising and unexpected, they didn't just happen spontaneously. They were no accident. Firstly, the Magi would have had to travel for months to reach Judea. Given the likely distance they were away from their homeland, it wasn't a quick trip. The journey would have been long and tiring and would have needed a lot of careful planning. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision to set out, but a considered, intentional choice. As surprising as their arrival was for those who were there, it must have been carefully planned. And what about the star? I always wonder about this mysterious star that just appeared in the sky at the right moment. Where did that come from? One of my favourite interpretations of the Christmas story is a BBC adaptation that was about 15 years ago now. It's just called The Nativity. But I've watched it lots of years in the run up to Christmas, and I really like the way that it presents the story differently. At the start, we see Mary and Joseph pondering, can God see us right now? And can God see each of us as individuals or just the world as one? And then we zoom out into space and you see planets moving around each other. And there's a sort of a soundtrack that's a little bit like kind of machinery clunking into place. It's like a sort of a whirring, and it's like this is being moved intentionally. These planets are being moved intentionally in order to make something happen. And then we go to the Magi, who are starting to discuss the track these planets are on that they're watching, and saying it looks like they're going to come together to form a conjunction, which is where the three planets align and they appear as one single star, and they can see it coming. It's already happening. At the same time as in one place, Mary and Joseph are making the arrangements for their betrothal to be announced, the Magi have already spotted that something's happening, and the planets are already beginning to move into place. Now, this is only one interpretation, and you might think about it differently. We don't really know how or what that star was that appeared. Was it an alignment that was created specifically for that purpose? Or did God just use a real astronomical event that was going to happen anyway to draw attention to Jesus' birth? Or maybe it was something else. Either way, the timing of Jesus' birth with the appearance of the star wasn't and couldn't have been an accident. It was planned and carefully executed by God who'd been preparing for it, speaking of it through the prophets, and setting in motion all those conditions for it to happen. This is God knowing that this was the moment, having been preparing for it, and now seeing it come to be. Surprising and yet planned for. And the last contrast is between the known and the unknown, those who think they understand and those who want to understand more. The Magi travel a long way because they know the prophecies and they know what they mean. They know the sky and the placement of all of the stars, and they know when that's changed. And they know the significance of those changes. But even with all their knowledge, they still travel to learn more, to find out what the prophecy is and what its fulfillment looks like. They don't know when they set out what they're going to find, but they travel with an open mind, seeking to know more. And again, this contrasts with Herod and his advisors. Those people sitting there in the palace with their texts. They consult the texts to find out what it says, but they already know what the prophecy is. They've known it for a long time. And Herod knows all too well what the Jewish people believe about the Messiah. And Herod fears him more than anything. This new leader who's going to come and liberate the people of Israel, overthrow the occupying Roman forces, and remove him into the bargain. But Herod doesn't stop to consider that there might be more to it than that. He and his advisors already think they know everything they need to. Compared to the Magi, who are very knowledgeable, but are on a quest to learn more. They know that they're looking for a new king, for example, and they start in the obvious place, in the palace. We don't know how they react when they find out that they're wrong. They go to the palace expecting that the new king has been born there, and they're told that he hasn't, but we don't know what that does to how they feel about their journey. We just know that they set off again in search, and that when they find Jesus, they kneel down and worship him and they give him their gifts, just as they would have done if they'd found him where they expected, in the palace, as a king surrounded by riches. So they find him in a completely different place, but that doesn't change what they believe, and it doesn't change how they respond. They still believe that he is that king and worthy of their gifts and their worship. The Magi's journey was about seeking and searching for knowledge. They came looking for answers rather than assuming that they already knew them. We call them wise men, not because they knew everything, but because they realized the importance of learning and trying to understand more. And I've got a short reading that I wanted to share with you at this point. This is from the Iona book that covers this part of the year. And this one is simply called Wisdom. Don't call me wise. It isn't wisdom that drives a man to leave his home and travel through the dead of night. It isn't wisdom that makes a man leave all he has behind, courts and comfort, respect and standing, to pursue a dream. Don't call me wise. I'm not sure that wisdom is a burden that I want to own. I've spent my life in study, mapping charts, recording information. I am old in knowledge, stale with information held too long. Don't call me wise. Wisdom does not cause a man to embrace adventure so fully. It is a force apart from reason, so far beyond himself he doesn't know how to resist its call. Don't call me wise. It's not wise to reach out for the unattainable. It's not wise to hold out so much hope. It's not wise to feel this excited. Am I following or chasing? Am I looking for kings or looking for meaning? Drawn on by the magnetism of the future, I am shedding wisdom with each eager step. I feel again the child's desire to touch a star, to touch the rim of heaven. The season of Christmas and of Epiphany is one of contrasts, of the inside and the outsider, the planned and the unexpected, of the known and the unknown. The certainty of the prophecies, the knowledge of the Magi, alongside the mystery of the incarnation, the movements of the planets, and the way it all aligned to bring them together. We don't know how much of this story is real and how much is symbolic, and there's a lot that we don't understand. But just like the Magi, we don't have to have all the answers. We don't always have to understand why. Sometimes we just need to know enough to set out and to be prepared to learn on the way. And this makes me think of an extract from a poem. You may recognise it. It was made famous by George VI in his 1939 Christmas broadcast, but it actually comes from a longer poem written by Minnie Louise Haskins. I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way." So I went forth, and finding the hand of God, trod gladly into the night, and he led me towards the hills and the breaking of the day in the lone east. Amen.